again, and welcome back to another video, and today we're looking at a scenario where Bulgaria won the Second Balkan War. In the First Balkan War, the Balkan League with Bulgaria, well, the main contributors are Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece, but technically, like an independent Albania, Montenegro, etc., did also join the war. It did not end in the favor of any one true person. In the end, the main region of dispute was Macedonia, this area right here. Central Macedonia, Southern Macedonia, you could assume that goes to Greece, right? That makes a decent amount of sense. It's mostly Greek. And it also holds a very, very important city over here in Thessaloniki. But here in regular Macedonia, although it is more Bulgarian inclined, more similar to Bulgaria, the Serbians really did push for it, and in the end, this, along with some border disputes, ended up in the Second Balkan War. During this war, pretty much every one of Bulgaria's neighbors joined against them. Initially, it was just Serbia and Greece, but eventually Romania and the Ottoman Empire both joined in as well, leaving Bulgaria in a near impossible to win situation. But let's go ahead and assume that they somehow did win. They gained very little land from Romania's. The only way this works is if Romania barely contributes to the war at all. They also gained limited lands from Greece, only gaining this small portion of the north, and also fairly limited lands from Serbia. They could have taken the rest of eastern Serbia, but most people would have seen this as too much to take from the losing power, as once again, the only way they win this is if the war is far shorter and multiple people do not contribute as much. They also took a small amount of land from the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire was barely in Europe anymore. They had a very, very small amount of territory, something like that. Actually, even less than that, I would argue, something closer to that. So the Ottomans were pretty much just completely kicked out of Europe. The only thing Bulgaria didn't do is take the key city of Istanbul, as this is one of the most important cities in Europe. It is the largest city in Europe, at least in the modern day. Probably at the time as well. It is the capital of the Ottoman Empire, and it is incredibly important to Russia, as it controls the Bosporus Straits, which are the only way in or out of the Black Sea. So if Bulgaria would have taken this, they would immediately have catapulted up to one of the most important countries in Europe. Although from this situation, they are still one of the most important minor nations. They're still not nearly close to the power and influence of Germany, the United Kingdom, or Russia, but they're more powerful than many of the middle nations such as Sweden and Norway. And despite their size difference, I'd say they're just slightly behind Spain due to their heavy militarism. Let's go ahead and begin right before the World War begins. In this timeline, Serbia might be even more desperate for land, and they had been claiming parts of southern Austria-Hungary for a while now to unite into Yugoslavia, the South Slavs. This may be not as useful anymore because they've lost all of Macedonia, and Bulgaria is a massive anti-Serbian speaker, I guess. So that might not be as big of a deal. Along with that, Serbia has been weakened, so the nation itself cannot stand up to Austria-Hungary in any way. But I still see it as a likely possibility that when a certain archduke visits Sarajevo, he will be assassinated. And since I don't want to change too much, at least at the beginning, we're going to go ahead and assume that is the case. With that, Austria-Hungary would go ahead and declare war on Serbia. Immediately, well, not immediately, but very soon after, Russia would join on the side of Serbia, a fellow Slavic nation, and honestly, everyone knew a war was going to start. Russia could have used a few more years to prepare, but we're going to assume once again that this war starts at the exact same time so that it doesn't become too, different, at least in the beginning. From here, Austria-Hungary would start a minor advance into Serbia. Serbia's army at this point would be incredibly weakened, as war reparations would be put on them by the Bulgarians. This would most definitely allow Austria-Hungary to begin to win in northern Serbia, even with limited troops. Russia may begin some small attacks along the Austro-Hungarian border. In our timeline, it was actually an Austrian mistake to try and fight the Russians instead of just digging down. So we're going to assume some minor progress for the Russians. But at this point, some of the most powerful nations will begin to join, besides Russia, of course. That includes Germany, who would be joining in on the side of Austria-Hungary. They're both in the same faction, they are both some Germanic brothers, and they would be on the same side of this war. Germany would bring in all of their colonies from across the world, a decent empire in Austria, a small empire in the Pacific. Not a massive empire, but Germany is still at this point, I believe, the most powerful land army in Europe. That would not be changed by some Balkan war. And with Germany joining France, who is heavily anti-German and also an ally of Russia, would also be joining in, bringing in their respective empire as well. France from there may begin some minor advances into the German colonies, but in the end, these colonial campaigns would not be the deal breaker for this war. Instead, it would be what's happening in Europe that decides who will win. Germany will begin a small push along the French border, but very quickly it will be clear that this is going to be extremely difficult if they want to push past the heavily defended French-German border. So they are going to do exactly what they did in our timeline. At this point, Montenegro may have also joined in. They honestly might not have. They did have some amount of war operations and army restrictions put on them, but eventually they would probably get involved as well, if just later. But Germany will still go ahead, try and move around these French defenses by attacking Luxembourg and Belgium. This, at the beginning, would go very well. They managed to push into Belgium, but Belgian resistance does slow them down more than Germany had been hoping. And along with this, with a declaration of war in Belgium, the United Kingdom would also join the war against the Central Powers. I'm not going to color in all of Canada because that takes 10 years and really just does not matter very much. If you get the mainland, it's fairly clear that Canada is in this war. There we go. They would also bring with them the rest of their dominions and colonies, with a massive African empire controlling most of Oceania, British Malaya, and the British Raj, including all of India and the rest of the Indian subcontinent, and multiple territories in the Middle East that were under British control or heavy British influence. This would absolutely change the tide of the war, especially on the African front, where the United Kingdom is absolutely dominant over the entire world, except maybe on mainland Europe. The United Kingdom would dominate Germany. They would absolutely start to crush all German colonies, with them standing little of a chance of surviving more than a few months. Germany would attempt to conscript the people of these colonies to fight for them, but once again, in the end, it would simply just not work. Germany would continue their advance into Belgium, and this is going to go similarly to in our timeline. I do want Germany to do a bit better. That's going to be important later on, so we're going to assume they reach the coast sooner and they start to push into northern France. A slightly better scenario for Germany as they push to the coast and get close to Paris, but in the end they are still stalled, and this is nothing more than a bit of a more threatening position against Britain, controlling some of the channel ports, and a slightly more powerful position over France as they control multiple cities that they did not in our timeline. They also have a better position to push to Paris, but that may not happen either. From here, it's gonna get pretty bogged down, same as it did in our timeline. A bit of back and forth, but eventually trench warfare would set in, and the border would be it would barely move at all at this point. Once the trench warfare fully sets in, it would be an absolute bloodbath to just gain a mile of land, or a few kilometers. At this point, the entire German colonial empire has also fallen completely, to the combined efforts of the British and the French. The Russians have pushed slightly more into northern Austria-Hungary, whilst the Germans have started some small advances against Russia. So again, we need the Germans to do slightly better just to ensure that Bulgaria does join in on the German side. This is not necessarily going to lead to a German victory, but you never know. And taking advantage of these weakened Montenegrin and Serbian states, Austria-Hungary would actually begin to crush them without too much German assistance. This point is where I'm going to add in Bulgaria. Bulgaria had been building up better relations with Germany, etc., and with the loss in the war, the Greek king was more unpopular than ever. This allows Greece and Bulgaria to join at very similar times against each other, with Greece joining in on the side of the Entente and the Allied powers as a whole, and Bulgaria joining in with the Central powers. The Ottoman Empire may be slightly more inclined to join in with the Entente in this scenario, but I don't think that just because they lost a few lands to Bulgaria, that they would be more inclined to ally with the United Kingdom and especially Russia over Germany and Austria-Hungary. So soon enough, the Ottoman Empire would be in this war as well, if maybe a bit later. Italy is still not in this war, but they will be joining in fairly soon. The Ottoman Empire would attempt to make a few invasions. These would not go very well. In Kuwait, they do manage to make a fair amount of progress, capturing Kuwait City and nearly capitulating the entire territory. But their mistake was to attempt to attack Egypt. Their push into the Sinai goes horribly, and basically, in return, the British are going to push up into Ottoman Palestine, cutting off many of the Arabian parts of the Ottoman Empire. This would lead to these territories starting to rise up a lot sooner than in our timeline, as the Central Powers' victories only made the Ottoman Empire want to expand more, and possibly in the end weaken them, as these revolts would be happening slightly sooner. All of these are slight changes, but I do think Bulgaria will change one thing massively, and that is central power control of the Balkans. With Bulgarian aid, Serbia would fall within days. I do not think they would want to struggle very hard against this absolute mega power, which is now Bulgaria. Bulgaria would also begin a push down into Greece, possibly even capitulating the nation, and getting the entire Balkans under central power control very, very quickly, which would be absolutely amazing for them. Germany will not have to dedicate any troops down there, which means that even more troops can go towards the push into Russia, which means that Russia will be pushed back sooner. And a sooner Russian capitulation will give Germany more time to organize along the French border before American troops start to arrive. We would also see Bulgaria realizing the complete incompetence of the Ottoman Empire, and although the southern Ottomans do fall with some Bulgarian assistance, they will manage to push back into parts of Palestine and Jordan. Well, modern day Israel and Jordan. At this time it was called Palestine. Just Palestine. The Ottomans would also make another mistake, which was to try their own luck against Russia. Once again, some initial victories, but after a short push, the Russians would realize the complete destruction they can inflict upon the Ottomans and push into parts of Ottoman Armenia. This may actually cause the Armenian genocide to be either delayed or much, much smaller, as most Armenian territories are still under the control of Russia, and the Ottomans are already very mad at a lot more people. They may even be capitulating sooner, as they have been weakened by this war against Bulgaria. Near this point, Romania may also join in, trying to help the Entente succeed. With the Ottoman Empire collapsing, they are hoping that the Balkan theater may not last much longer. Sadly for them, they were completely wrong. The Bulgarians can completely collapse Romania within a few weeks, and with some Austro-Hungarian aid, all that Romania has done is lengthen the front line with Russia, which is truly a good thing for the Central Powers, as Bulgaria is able to dedicate most of their force into southern Ukraine, which is going to heavily harm the Russian Empire. They would also be able to, Austria-Hungary would also have more troops to fight against the Russians, as they are not forced to keep troops in Serbia, with Bulgaria taking the main part of the Serbian front and occupying it. These massive advances into Russia would not be very good for the nation, which was already struggling heavily. Even the Ottoman Empire, who was the sick man of Europe, may start to push back the Russians, as Russian troops are needed elsewhere. Once again, this may lead to a slightly sooner Russian revolution, slightly sooner Russian capitulation. None of these changes are massive, but it may happen a bit sooner. We're going to assume that the Russian Revolution is going to start right around now, as some of the communists start to rise up around St. Petersburg. This, the probably second most important city in all of Russia, and its number one trade post, well, it's number one Baltic port, I can't speak, Baltic port, is now rising up against the Russian government, together with multiple other communist cells in the area. From there, the Ukrainian communist people, the Ukrainian SSR is also going to rise up, along with an Azerbaijani communist government rising up. We may see some Central Asian rebellions, etc. But we would see the communists all around Russia start to rise up against the main government. The Germans may push swiftly just to try and capture much of Ukraine before the communists start to gain ground and before a peace treaty is made, in order to secure Ukrainian grain. At this point, I think they would stop their advance into Russia, if anything, just giving up some land. Russia, at this point, it's fairly clear to just about anyone who even looks at their country that they will fall apart. They really don't stand much of a chance anymore. They are no longer a threat. With this sooner Russian capitulation, Germany would be able to refocus fully on France and may manage a breakthrough in the south. The north at this point was too deep into trench warfare, but a southern push may convince Italy to join in on their side. This is where I'm going to assume that two timelines will be made. One where Italy ignores this German advance and instead decides to join in on the side of the Entente. And one which I prefer, where somehow all of this further Entente weakness, leads to Italy ending up joining the Central Powers after Austria-Hungary gives up some certain territories. I'm going to be showing both peace treaties at the end, but I am going to be assuming that in this scenario, Italy does join the Central Powers, who look as if they are going to win, at least up to now. With this Italian joining, the sooner Russian collapse, and the end of the Balkan theater, the US as well, if we get lucky and possibly even a different president is elected or anything like that, a slightly different vote in Congress. That's the thing about the US at this point. One changed senator might be able to rally 10 senators to vote for something else, and that may completely change the outcome of this war. We're going to assume that France does manage to push back Germany, at least to some extent, whilst Germany pushes back in the north. Will this lead to a German victory? I wouldn't say no. Once again, if Germany did join the Entente, and that is a fairly likely scenario, even if Italy joins the Central Powers, I still think that the Entente has a good chance of winning, as long as the United States joins in on their side. I want the Central Powers to win, because that is the side Bulgaria is on, and this video is about Bulgaria. So, Germany manages a major breakthrough in northern France, capturing Paris, and the French country, after losing certain territories in the south to Italy, is getting absolutely destroyed. Italy would also bring in certain colonies in Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. These Somalian and Eritrean colonies would most likely fall, but in Libya, with certain Central Power aid, I think that they could have a very decent chance of winning. This would be absolutely crucial as it may lessen the load that the Ottoman Empire now has to bear coming in from the south. This British push is very much so crippling the Ottomans, but if the Ottomans are just able to survive for slightly longer, especially now that the Russian front is no longer an issue, I think they could survive long enough, just barely long enough, to not be completely destroyed by the British. We're also going to assume at this point that in the south, the White Army has managed to win, but in the north, the communists are taking land at a rapid rate. Finnish rebels would at this point also be rising up for their own independence, as they really don't want to be under a Russian government, communist or not. The communists in Ukraine would also start to face some opposition, as a non-communist government of Ukraine starts to rise up against them and against the Russians, which just further complicates this. Along with this, a Central Asian rebellion takes place against the communists and the Russians for their own state. And the Russian Civil War is just getting more and more messy. This is just to make it a bit more entertaining, not necessarily realistic. None of this is realistic in truth. But it's just a fun way of looking at things. If I just said Balkan theater closed slightly quicker, nothing else changes. The peace treaty might be slightly different, slightly larger Bulgaria, smaller Turkey. Maybe Turkey loses their war of independence without being able to capture certain territories. I couldn't even tell you, but it would not be very interesting unless I start to change some other things as well. The Finns would at this point have taken over most of their land, whilst the communists secure the north. They then secure Moscow, and at this point the civil war is really looking like it's going to be over. The Ukrainian non-communist rebels are gone, and by now the communists have declared that they are the real Russian government, and the whites are simply rebelling against them. At this point, it's going to go fairly similarly to in our timeline, the Russian Civil War. I don't think a Bulgarian victory would upset that too much. The communists would win. I'm not going to map out exactly how. Some people might make some more mistakes. Some people might be slightly different due to the time difference. But in the end, the communists would win, and a peace treaty would be signed with the Germans. In this peace treaty, Poland would gain its independence as a German puppet state. The Kingdom of Lithuania would be set up along with the Kingdom of Estonia, just a few Baltic duchies to secure German interests in the Baltic. Finland would get its independence. Just going to change up its borders a bit, because some certain things would be different in this world. Once again, the Central Powers would most likely still not win, even if Bulgaria was slightly larger. That is a fairly unrealistic thing that I'm going to add. But once again, if I just change nothing except a small amount of land in the end, that is boring. Finland gains their independence. Poland and the Baltic duchies join together with Germany. Along with this, a Ukrainian, puppet is also going to be set up, controlling all of Ukraine pretty much. This is a massive loss for the communists, but what are they going to do? If they start a war with Germany, they will win not just that war, but the Civil War, and that would absolutely crush them. Along with this, a Belarusian state is going to be set up in the center. And down in the south with the Ottomans, maybe the Ottomans will see some slight expansion. An Azerbaijani puppet state would be very useful for the Central Powers, as Azerbaijan has a very large amount of oil. And I do not see this peace treaty being very, very different from our timeline. Just something simple as such. Romania may also not be giving any land, as they capitulated within 2 days pretty much. They were not a threat. They are not considered a threat. And now Germany has fully secured the east. The Ottomans are fairly safe for now, and northern France has fallen. I am going to set up a peace treaty here with a Central Powers victory. Just simply because I could go on, one power might win over the other. In my opinion, this slightly stronger Bulgaria would not lead to a Central Powers victory. It would still be an Entente victory with slightly different Balkan borders. But that's boring, so let's assume the Central Powers manage to win. Germany will take much of northern France with the goal of capturing their iron supply and pushing the border further into French defenses to ensure that in a future war, Germany could absolutely decimate them. These Belgian and Luxembourgish lands are unnecessary, but just a slight expansion to ensure that the French cannot win a future war against Germany under any situation. A Belgian puppet would also be set up, taking a small portion of northern France to get Germany, or at least a German puppet, closer to the British Isles. This could be seen as a threat to Britain, which may make Britain slightly more hesitant about joining a future war against Germany. Italy would be given certain parts of southern France. These are just the territories that they had claim to. In Nice, Savoy, Corsica, they would see some major expansion in Africa, taking all of Tunisia and expanding Italian Libya. I don't think they would take anything from Egypt, but if possible, the Germans would push to gain the Suez. The Ottomans would be given control of the rest of the Middle East. And I can actually decolor Russia. Russia is not going to be important for the rest of this. Romania may lose some slight border territories, especially to Bulgaria, who may take the rest of the Romanian coast as an act of basically destroying the Romanian nation. Austria-Hungary may take some small border territories, and then they would become an Austro-Hungarian or Bulgarian puppet. Just about what you'd expect, really. The punishment for Serbia would be slightly more severe, as they would lose certain territories in the south, and especially a lot of their east to Bulgaria directly. The rest of them, it could go either way, to Bulgaria or to Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary will take the Montenegrin coastline, and Bulgaria would expand down into Greece. The rest of Greece would become a Bulgarian puppet nation, completely and totally under Bulgarian control. This would result in the entirety of the Balkans except for Albania, which would probably be rewarded to Italy under Central Powers control. And more specifically, Bulgarian control, especially if Serbia does end up going with Bulgaria, possibly even in a full union under a Bulgarian-led Yugoslavia. These British losses in the Middle East as well may be small, but now after this war, I could see another power turning into the sick man. The Ottomans have a chance if they play their cards right. They are getting a second chance. Maybe not a perfect one, but hey, they get another chance at life. As for Africa, I already mentioned Italian expansion out from Italian Libya. This would be incredibly good for the Italians, as they now have a large amount of control over the Mediterranean. They may even be given control of Malta to truly secure this Italian control of the central Mediterranean. Meanwhile, France, I doubt they would lose any more mainland territories. It's already a bit extreme what they've lost. Britain would not lose any more mainland territories, so this is the end of mainland Europe. Fairly punishing on the losers, but definitely securing German, Italian, and Bulgarian dominance. Austria-Hungary would most likely fall, which may actually lead to Bulgaria taking up Yugoslavia. If Bulgaria did take up Yugoslavia, also I'm just going to ignore the rest of Africa. It's not really important to this. This is about Bulgaria. And if Bulgaria did take up the mantle of Yugoslavia, when, and this is when, not if, Austria-Hungary capitulates, Italy would take some certain lands. But Bulgaria could very well be expanded into a very, very powerful country, uniting all of the South Slavs in their entirety, and setting up a nation that might grow to rival Italy, or at least some other minor powers such as Spain or the Nordics. I am gonna end it there. I didn't finish the the African Peace Treaty, but nothing too interesting would happen here. This is a video about Bulgaria. If the Central Powers win, I see a bright future for Bulgaria. If the Entente wins, which is still more likely, despite a slightly stronger Central Powers, the future may see a larger Bulgaria. Not very much richer though, so the Soviets would still take control. All of that. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.